every military relay, every civilian network, every orbital station. The message appeared in more than 6,000 known languages simultaneously, translated with impossible precision by the ancient systems buried beneath Luna. A crimson insignia filled the screens of humanity, the symbol of the Galactic Empire. For most species in the galaxy, seeing that symbol meant one thing: submission. The Empire ruled nearly 40,000 systems. Their fleets blotted out stars. Entire civilizations disappeared after refusing tribute. Their emperors had existed longer than human recorded history. And now, they had declared war on Earth. Across the galaxy, panic spread instantly. But on Earth, humanity barely reacted. The citizens of New Jakarta continued walking to work beneath the artificial rain domes. Cargo pilots over Mars complained more about delayed docking schedules than the declaration itself. On Europa Station, a bartender looked at the news feed and muttered, "Again." Then he went back to cleaning glasses. The only visible reaction came from the financial markets. Coffee futures dipped 3%. That was it. 3 light years away. Aboard the Imperial flagship Dominion's Wrath, Supreme Executor Valens stared at the intelligence reports in disbelief. "They are doing nothing?" The officer beside him swallowed nervously. "Yes, Executor." Valens for Crimson eyes narrowed. "No fleet mobilization? Minimal. No emergency broadcasts? None detected. No civilian panic?" The officer hesitated. One human social network is currently debating whether the war will interrupt a sporting event. Silence filled the bridge. Then several Imperial officers laughed. A primitive species refusing to acknowledge Imperial power. Arrogance. That was all it could be. Executor Valens straightened his ceremonial armor. "Prepare the first assault fleet. We will teach humanity respect." No one on the Imperial bridge knew the truth. Humanity had seen far worse than the Galactic Empire. Because humanity had not always been alone. 300 years earlier, Earth had nearly died. Not from alien invasion. Not from war. From silence. The stars had gone dark one by one. Entire colonies vanished without distress calls. Fleets disappeared between systems. Artificial intelligences began malfunctioning in impossible ways. Humanity called it the quiet collapse. At first, they blamed pirates. Then rogue AI. Then cosmic radiation. They were wrong. The thing responsible had no official name because no one survived long enough to study it. It moved between stars without ships. It consumed information before matter. Civilizations forgot themselves before they died. Worlds were found intact but empty, their populations standing motionless like statues, memories erased completely. Humanity lost 87 colonies in 12 years. And unlike the Galactic Empire, the quiet collapse could not be threatened, could not be negotiated with, could not be killed by ordinary weapons. Humanity survived only because they adapted faster than anyone else. They decentralized command, disconnected critical systems from galactic networks, built analog infrastructure, created military doctrines designed for fighting enemies beyond comprehension. And eventually, humanity learned how to hunt monsters. The war declaration from the Empire interrupted Admiral Elias Ward during breakfast. He read the message once, then sighed. His daughter looked up from her cereal. "Another one? Looks like it. Are they dangerous?" Ward considered the question carefully, then shrugged. "Probably not." His daughter nodded casually and returned to eating. That single moment summarized humanity perfectly. Deep beneath the Arctic Circle, doors weighing thousands of tons opened slowly. Not because Earth feared invasion, because protocol demanded preparation. Buried facilities awakened across the solar system. Ancient factories lit up beneath Martian crust. Autonomous shipyards activated near Saturn. Cold storage vaults unlocked after centuries of silence. The systems awakening were older than most nations, and none of them had been built for wars against ordinary empires. In the Galactic Senate, Emperor Kaler addressed thousands of representatives. The massive chamber trembled beneath applause. "The humans believe themselves untouchable," Kaler declared. "They ignore lawful imperial authority. They mock our warnings. They insult the stability of the galaxy itself." Cheers erupted. Many species hated humanity already. Humans refused imperial trade laws, refused military oversight, refused cultural integration. Worst of all, they refused fear. The Emperor raised one clawed hand dramatically. "In 6 days, Earth will kneel." The Senate exploded into celebration. Far away, hidden among the crowd, one old alien lowered his head in horror. Ambassador Threx remembered humanity during the quiet collapse. He remembered the screams across emergency frequencies. He remembered human fleets fighting things that erase stars. And he remembered the final transmission from Earth after humanity won. A message sent to every surviving species. If the darkness ever returns, stay behind us. Threx stared at the celebrating senators. None of them understood what they were provoking. The Imperial Assault Fleet entered the Sol system 72 hours later. 6,000 warships emerged near Neptune in perfect formation. It was the largest fleet assembled in centuries. Their commanders expected resistance. Minefields, defense platforms, human fleets. Instead, they found a navigation beacon. A single automated message repeated calmly across open frequencies. Welcome to Sol space. Please maintain safe travel distance. Unauthorized weapons fire will void your insurance claims. Several Imperial officers laughed openly. Executor Valen did not. Something felt wrong. Too calm. Too organized. Too confident. Advance toward Earth, he ordered. The fleet obeyed. Then one of the scanners detected movement. At first, the officers assumed it was debris. Tiny metallic objects drifting beyond Pluto. Millions of them. No. Billions. The tactical officer frowned. Executor, those objects are activating. The screen zoomed closer. Tiny machines unfolded across empty space, like silver flowers blooming in darkness. Ancient human drones. Dormant for centuries. And every single one was turning toward the Imperial fleet. Valen frowned. How many? The officer's voice became unsteady. We cannot calculate accurately. Estimate. A long silence followed. Then, approximately 900 billion units. The bridge went silent. Back on Earth, Admiral Ward sipped coffee while watching the tactical feed. A young officer beside him looked nervous. Sir, should we warn them? Ward raised an eyebrow. We did. I mean properly. They crossed the line anyway. The officer hesitated. Will the defense swarm be enough? Ward almost laughed. That isn't the defense swarm. The officer blinked. Then what is it? Ward looked at the screen calmly. Border security. The first Imperial ship exploded 30 seconds later. No warning. No visible attack. One moment the cruiser existed. The next moment it became expanding plasma. Then another ship vanished. Then 5 more. Panic erupted across the Imperial formation. Source of attack. Unknown. Shields ineffective. Objects bypassing armor. The tiny drones moved faster than targeting systems could track. They slipped through shield harmonics like ghosts. Every destroyed ship vanished with surgical precision. No wasted ammunition. No dramatic explosions. Just efficient annihilation. Executor Valen roared in fury. Return fire. Thousands of Imperial weapons lit space itself on fire. Entire drone clouds evaporated instantly. But it changed nothing. Because there were always more. Billions more. The swarm surrounded the fleet from every direction. Like an ocean closing around drowning prey. On Luna, an elderly technician glanced at the battle report and frowned. Huh. Another worker looked over. What? We lost 20 million drones. The younger worker winced. That sounds bad. The old technician shook his head. We still have 99.9% remaining in this sector. Oh, yeah. They returned to work. The battle lasted 19 minutes. At the end of it, the Imperial Assault Fleet no longer existed. 6,000 warships. Gone. Human casualties. 0. Across the galaxy, shockwaves spread instantly. Entire governments refused to believe the footage was real. The Galactic Empire had not lost fleets in open battle for over 2,000 years. Yet humanity destroyed one in less than half an hour, without deploying their actual military. Inside the Imperial Palace, Emperor Kaler stared at the combat recordings in frozen silence. The room trembled as another advisor spoke carefully. Sire, perhaps negotiation is preferable. Kaler slammed his claws into the throne. Impossible. But the humans are still mortal. His voice echoed violently across the chamber. They rely on machines. Numbers. Tricks. We will crush them with superior force. No one dared answer. But fear had already entered the room. Because every advisor noticed the same terrifying detail in the recordings. The humans had not sounded angry. Not afraid. Not even excited. Just inconvenienced. and that frightened them more than anything else. Far beyond Imperial territory, something ancient awakened in deep space. A signal had spread from Sol during the battle. Not a distress call. A status update. Encrypted in protocols forgotten by most civilizations. One ancient listening station decoded the message automatically. Threat level, minimal. Containment unnecessary. Humanity stable. Then, after a pause, a second line appeared. But monitoring continues. And somewhere in the darkness between galaxies, something heard humanity speaking again. The destruction of the Imperial assault fleet spread across the galaxy within hours. At first, most systems believed the footage was fabricated. Then independent observers confirmed it. Then Imperial survivors began transmitting fragmented distress logs before their escape pods lost power. And slowly, disbelief turned into fear. Inside the Galactic Empire, entire military sectors entered emergency readiness. For the first time in centuries, Imperial citizens saw something unfamiliar on state-controlled networks. Uncertainty. News anchors stumbled through explanations, while officials contradicted each other publicly. One commentator insisted the Sol fleet had used illegal dimensional weapons. Another blamed rogue AI. A third claimed humanity had secretly allied with an extinct precursor race. None of them understood the truth. Humanity had simply prepared longer than everyone else. On Earth, life remained irritatingly normal. Children still attended school. Freight traffic still clogged orbital lanes. Restaurants on Titan still argued about food licensing regulations. The only noticeable difference was that military recruitment advertisements disappeared from public networks. They were no longer necessary. Every human defense system had already activated automatically. Admiral Elias Ward stood inside the Strategic Preservation Command beneath Antarctica. The facility looked less like a military headquarters and more like a buried city. Kilometers of corridors stretched beneath the ice. Ancient servers hummed behind armored walls. Some of the machines there were older than modern governments. A holographic display rotated slowly before him. Imperial fleets. Hundreds of them. Gathering at the borders of human-controlled space. Commander Sofia Reyes folded her arms. They're mobilizing everything. Ward nodded. They're embarrassed. That makes them dangerous. No, Ward replied quietly. Fear makes them dangerous. Turin deactivated the recording. That was humanity 3 centuries ago. Kaler scoffed. Ancient propaganda. No, Turin replied. Ancient survivors. Meanwhile, in deep space near the edge of Sol territory, something moved silently through darkness. No engines. No lights. No visible structure. Imperial scouts attempting long-range surveillance began disappearing one by one. Ships vanished without distress calls. Crew logs ended mid-sentence. Entire patrol groups simply ceased to exist. At first, Imperial intelligence blamed hidden mines, then stealth ships, then sensor failure. But the truth was worse. The humans had released hunters. The first Imperial crew to encounter one survived for exactly 4 minutes. Their vessel, the Sovereign Talon, drifted near an asteroid field when internal alarms activated. Captain Rull entered the bridge angrily. Report. A terrified officer pointed at the scanner. There's something inside the ship. Rull frowned. Borders. No life signs. The lights flickered, then died completely. Emergency crimson lighting filled the corridors. Metal groaned somewhere deep within the vessel. Slow. Heavy. Like something enormous crawling through ventilation shafts. The crew armed themselves immediately. Pulse rifles aimed toward the dark corridor outside the bridge. Silence. Then, thud, thud, thud. The sound came closer. A Marine swallowed nervously. What is that? Nobody answered. The corridor lights flashed once. And for a fraction of a second, they saw it. A massive silhouette. Too tall. Too thin. Metal fused with something organic. Its eyes glowed pale white in the darkness. Then the lights died again. The screaming started seconds later. Back on Earth, the event barely reached public attention. Most civilian networks categorized the missing Imperial scouts as ongoing border incidents. Humanity avoided broadcasting the details intentionally, not out of secrecy, out of mercy, because the hunters were never meant for ordinary wars. They were relic weapons from the quiet collapse. Machines built specifically to fight things that should not exist. And once awakened, they never truly slept again. Inside the Imperial Palace, Panic finally began spreading among the elite. Entire scouting divisions had vanished. Long-range communications suffered unexplained interference. Automated navigation systems malfunctioned near Sol space. And worst of all, human diplomats still hadn't responded to the declaration of war. No demands, no threats, no negotiations, nothing. The silence became unbearable. Kaler slammed his fist against the throne. Why won't they answer us? No one dared respond. Because everyone in the room secretly feared the same possibility. Humanity did not consider the Empire important enough to answer. Days later, the Empire launched its second offensive. This time they came prepared. 20,000 warships. Shield frequencies adjusted. Drone countermeasures active. Quantum prediction systems online. The largest military force assembled in modern galactic history. Entire systems watched the live military feeds. This would decide everything. Either humanity would finally break, or the galaxy would discover something far worse. The Imperial Armada entered Sol space cautiously. Unlike before, no drones appeared immediately. No attacks. No warnings. Only silence. Executor Valen stood aboard the new flagship with visible tension. Maintain formation. The fleet advanced slowly toward Mars orbit. Then the stars disappeared. Not literally, but every sensor across the fleet suddenly stopped detecting them. One by one, navigation systems failed. Long-range scanners went blind. Communication arrays filled with static. Panic spread instantly. What's happening? Unknown interference. We lost positional tracking. A junior officer looked up in horror. Sir, space itself is changing. Valen turned sharply. The visual displays distorted strangely. Dark ripples moved through the void like waves beneath water. Reality bent unnaturally around the fleet. And then, the voices began. Whispers flooded communication systems in dozens of languages. Some begged for help. Others laughed softly. Many simply screamed. Imperial crews covered their ears in terror. Several officers collapsed instantly. One navigator tore out his own neural implants while sobbing uncontrollably. Valen roared over the chaos. Find the source. Then a new signal appeared across every Imperial screen simultaneously. A human face. Old. Calm. Expressionless. The man spoke quietly. You entered restricted quarantine territory. Valen stared furiously. Who are you? The old man ignored the question. You were warned. This galaxy belongs to the Empire. The human finally looked directly into the camera. And for the first time, he looked tired. No, he said softly. It belongs to survivors. The transmission ended. Then the darkness around the fleet moved. Huge shapes emerged slowly from distorted space itself. Not ships. Something else. Thousands of Imperial soldiers watched in horror as impossible black structures unfolded around them. Ancient human war platforms. Planet killers. Weapons humanity had sworn never to use again. Until now. Back on Earth, Admiral Ward closed the tactical feed. Commander Reyes looked pale. Sir, did we really activate the graveyard fleet? Ward nodded once. They forced Stage 2 escalation. Reyes hesitated carefully. The Empire has no idea what they're fighting. Ward stared silently toward the frozen wall beyond the command center. That's the problem. He paused. They think this is still a war. The galaxy watched in absolute silence. 20,000 Imperial warships floated motionless near the edge of Sol space, surrounded by black structures older than most civilizations. The graveyard fleet. No broadcasts came from the Imperial Armada anymore. Only static. And somewhere beneath that static, screaming. Across thousands of worlds, citizens crowded around public holoscreens. For centuries, the Galactic Empire had represented absolute power. Unstoppable. Eternal. Now its greatest fleet looked trapped like prey inside a cage. Even worse, the humans still hadn't deployed their main military forces. Inside the Imperial flagship, Executor Valen struggled to maintain control. Restore communications. Engineers worked frantically across the bridge. Nothing responds, sir. Navigation offline. We can't lock targets. Valen's claws dug into his command throne. Outside the viewport, the enormous black structures drifted silently, each one larger than a moon, covered in ancient scars. Some sections looked melted. Others appeared almost organic. And all of them pointed toward the Imperial fleet like loaded weapons. A trembling officer whispered, What are those things? No one answered. Then one of the structures activated. A deep vibration echoed through space itself. Not sound. Something worse. The vibration passed through metal, flesh, and thought simultaneously. Several crew members collapsed instantly, bleeding from their eyes. And suddenly the main display changed. A message appeared in ancient imperial script. Nothing that enters the dark returns unchanged. Valen stared at the words in horror. That phrase was forbidden. An ancient warning from the earliest days of imperial expansion. Most believed it was mythology. But one old officer on the bridge began shaking violently. I know this. Valen turned sharply. What did you say? The officer swallowed hard. My grandfather told stories. Old frontier legends. He pointed weakly toward the black structures. They called them tomb gates. Silence filled the bridge. Then the officer whispered the final part. Humanity sealed something behind them. 300 years earlier, humanity had reached the brink of extinction. Entire sectors of space became infected with impossible phenomena. Ships arrived before they departed. Dead crews sent distress calls years after burial. Stars whispered. Physics stopped behaving correctly. The quiet collapse spread faster than any war in recorded history. At first, humanity fought alone because no one believed them. Then other species encountered it. By then it was too late. Civilizations disappeared overnight. Some species killed themselves rather than face what waited in the dark between stars. Humanity survived only because they abandoned morality long enough to win. They built weapons no sane species would create. Machines designed to think like predators. Fleets capable of burning entire solar systems sterile. And eventually, they found the source. A wound in reality itself. Something ancient trying to enter the galaxy. Humanity never destroyed it. They simply locked the door. The graveyard fleet became the seal. And every human government agreed on one law afterward. Never wake the graveyard fleet again. Back in the present, humanity had broken that law. Because the Empire refused to stop. On Earth, protests finally erupted in several cities. Not against the war. Against escalation. People remembered the old stories. The graveyard fleet terrified humans more than aliens. In New London, millions gathered beneath storm-filled skies while giant screens displayed emergency parliamentary debates. A reporter spoke nervously into the camera. For the first time in over 2 centuries, containment-level military protocols have been activated. Citizens are advised. The broadcast cut suddenly. A new message replaced it. A calm female voice spoke across every human world. This is Secretary Amara Chun of the Solar Defense Authority. The crowds fell silent instantly. We are not facing extinction, Chun said calmly. But we are approaching unacceptable risk thresholds. Behind her appeared images of the Imperial fleets. Then older footage. The quiet collapse. Black stars. Burning worlds. Lost colonies. Human soldiers fighting impossible things in frozen darkness. Chun continued. The Empire believes humanity fears war. Her eyes hardened slightly. They misunderstand. The screen behind her changed again. Now it showed billions of names scrolling endlessly. The dead. Entire generations humanity lost during the collapse. We fear only one thing. The camera zoomed closer. Having to survive that again. The transmission ended. No one spoke afterward. Because every human understood the meaning. If necessary, humanity would burn the galaxy before allowing the darkness to return. Inside the Imperial Palace, panic had finally become open fear. Emperor Kaler stood before the shattered remains of a diplomatic console. You're telling me they hid this from the galaxy? Marshal Turin remained perfectly still. They buried the history intentionally. Why? Because survivors don't celebrate monsters. Kaler snarled angrily. They are bluffing. Turin looked directly at him. No, Majesty. The old marshal activated another classified file. This one older. Far older. An image appeared above the chamber. A human fleet surrounding an entire star system. Then firing. The star itself collapsed violently inward. Billions died instantly. Several Imperial advisors recoiled in horror. Kaler stared speechless. Turin's voice became almost hollow. That was a containment action. You're lying. I wish I were. Turin deactivated the recording. The humans didn't win the quiet collapse because they were stronger. He looked around the silent throne room. They won because they accepted costs no other species could endure. Meanwhile, Inside the trapped Imperial fleet, things were getting worse. The whispers hadn't stopped. Crew members reported seeing shadows moving through sealed corridors. Some ships opened fire on Allied vessels after sensor systems showed impossible enemies on board. Others simply went dark. Executor Valen marched through the bridge furiously. This is psychological warfare. But even he no longer sounded convinced. Then the tactical officer looked up in terror. Sir. Valen turned. The officer pointed toward the viewport. Everyone on the bridge froze. Something enormous was moving beyond the graveyard fleet. At first it looked like a distortion, then a silhouette, a shape larger than cities. Long limbs unfolded slowly through darkness. The stars behind it bent unnaturally. Valen whispered, "What is that?" No one answered, because every instinct aboard the ship already knew. The seal was weakening. Deep beneath Antarctica, alarms suddenly erupted across Strategic Preservation Command. Red lights flooded the corridors. Admiral Ward turned immediately. Report. A pale technician looked up from the console. Graveyard fleet integrity dropping. How much? The technician hesitated. 3%. Every officer in the room went silent. 3% was catastrophic. Commander Reyes stepped forward urgently. The Empire's fleet destabilized the quarantine field. Ward's face hardened. Can we restore containment? Not while their ships remain inside the perimeter. Another silence. Everyone understood the implication immediately. The Imperial fleet had become a contamination vector. If the seal failed completely, the quiet collapse could begin again. Ward closed his eyes briefly, then gave the order humanity prayed would never be spoken again. Activate extinction protocols. Several officers looked horrified. Sir. Ward stared at the tactical display. If containment fails, nothing outside Sol can survive. Reyes swallowed hard. You mean to destroy the entire region? Ward nodded once. Every star system within range. The room became deathly silent. No one argued. Because every person there knew history. Humanity had already sacrificed worlds once before. And they would do it again. Far away, beyond the edges of mapped space. Something ancient opened its eyes. For centuries, it had slept behind locked reality. Hungry. Waiting. Listening. Now it heard familiar voices again. Human voices. The species that had wounded it. The species that had chained it in darkness. And slowly, the thing beyond the seal began moving towards Sol. Inside the trapped Imperial fleet, all lights suddenly died. Every ship, every screen, every weapon system. Darkness swallowed the armada completely. Then one final transmission echoed across every vessel. Not from humanity. Something else. Something ancient. Something impossibly old. And it spoke only 3 words. They found me. Darkness consumed the Imperial fleet. No engines. No stars. No system displays. For several horrifying seconds, 20,000 warships drifted blind inside absolute blackness. Then the screaming began again. Only this time, it wasn't coming through communications. It came from outside the ships. Thousands of voices echoed through empty space itself. Begging, crying, laughing, praying. Executor Valen gripped the edge of his command throne as the emergency lights flickered weakly back online. Status. No answer. Several bridge officers sat motionless at their stations. Blood streamed from their eyes and ears. One of them slowly turned toward Valen. His mouth opened unnaturally wide, and another voice spoke through him. You should not have come here. The officer's neck snapped violently sideways. Dead. Bridge guards opened fire instantly. Valen stepped backward in horror. For the first time in his military career, he wanted to run. Far beyond Sol, hidden observatories across human territory activated ancient warning systems. Massive satellites rotated silently toward deep space. Encrypted emergency signals spread between colonies. One message repeated across every classified military channel. Seal event in progress. Possible external contact. On Earth, civilians finally noticed the change. Not because of news broadcasts. Because the sky itself began behaving strangely. Above several cities, stars flickered during daylight. Ocean tides shifted unpredictably. Children reported hearing whispers through household electronics. And everywhere across human space, old veterans became afraid. In the underground command center beneath Antarctica, Admiral Ward stared at the containment projections. They were getting worse. Fast. Commander Reyes spoke quietly beside him. Integrity down to 91%. Ward nodded silently. Estimated failure time. Unknown. The answer chilled the room more than any number could have. For centuries, humanity had monitored the seal. Minor fluctuations happened occasionally, but never like this. Never this fast. One of the analysts suddenly looked up sharply. Sir, we're receiving a signal from inside the quarantine zone. Human? No. Everyone in the room froze. The analyst swallowed nervously. It's requesting communication. Ward's expression darkened immediately. Block it. Too late. Every screen inside the command center activated simultaneously. Static flooded the walls. Then a shape appeared. Tall. Thin. Almost human. But wrong and subtle ways the mind struggled to process. Its face shifted constantly, unable to settle into one form. When it spoke, dozens of overlapping voices echoed together. You still fear us. No one moved. The thing tilted its head curiously. Even after victory, Ward finally answered. We didn't win. For the first time, the entity smiled. And somehow that was the most terrifying thing anyone there had ever seen. No, it whispered. You only delayed hunger. The screens exploded into static again. Several systems overloaded instantly. Technicians shouted across the room. Reyes looked pale. It breached secure channels. Ward's voice became ice cold. Raise extinction readiness to stage 1. Across the galaxy, the Empire began collapsing into chaos. News of the trapped fleet spread faster than censorship could contain it. Border systems declared independence. Several conquered species revolted openly for the first time in generations. Trade routes shut down. Entire economies froze overnight. And worst of all for the Empire, fear replaced obedience. Because everyone realized the same thing. The Galactic Empire had started a war against the one species carrying nightmares larger than empires. Inside the Imperial Palace, Emperor Kaler stood alone before the enormous windows overlooking the capital world. For the first time in centuries, he looked old. Marshal Turin entered quietly behind him. The outer colonies are in revolt. Kaler didn't turn. And the fleet? Turin hesitated. We've lost contact with nearly 40% of the armada. Silence. Finally, Kaler spoke softly. You knew? Turin closed his eyes briefly. I suspected. You still allowed this. I warned you. Kaler spun around furiously. You should have warned me harder. The old marshal looked exhausted. How do you explain monsters to people who believe themselves invincible? Kaler said nothing. Because there was no answer. Meanwhile, inside the quarantine zone, reality continued breaking apart. Imperial ships vanished randomly from formation. Some reappeared moments later twisted into impossible shapes. Others transmitted impossible internal scans. Hallways longer inside than the ships themselves. Doors opening into empty space. Crew members reporting voices inside their own thoughts. Entire battalions turned weapons on themselves after seeing things no recording systems captured. And beyond it all, the giant shape outside the fleet kept getting closer. Aboard the flagship, Valen watched the tactical feed with widening terror. The thing beyond the graveyard fleet was now clearly visible. It dwarfed battleships. Its surface shifted constantly like living shadow. Fragments of stars moved inside its body as though entire galaxies were trapped beneath black water. The tactical officer whispered, Our weapons won't affect that. Valen rounded on him instantly. Everything dies. The officer looked ready to cry. I don't think that thing does. Then alarms erupted again. A new contact appeared. Human ships. Thousands of them. For the first time since the war began, humanity's actual military had arrived. The human fleet emerged silently from jump space. No dramatic formations. No banners. Only cold efficiency. Ships of matte black metal drifted into position around the quarantine perimeter. Unlike Imperial vessels, human warships looked heavily scarred. Functional. Built by survivors, not politicians. At the center of the fleet appeared a single enormous carrier. The UNS Vigil. Humanity's oldest active warship. A vessel older than the Empire itself. Inside its command chamber, Fleet Admiral Naomi Sato stood watching the containment zone calmly. An officer approached nervously. Admiral, extinction protocol authorization codes are standing by. Sato nodded once. Hold for now. Another officer looked uneasy. Ma'am, if the seal collapses. I know. She stared toward the distorted darkness ahead. We wait until the last possible second. Because once extinction protocols activated, entire sectors of the galaxy would burn. Suddenly, every human ship received the same encrypted signal. Priority Omega. Ancient authorization. Sato opened the message immediately. Her expression changed for the first time. One sentence appeared on the screen. External entity, approaching soul. Then another line followed. Classification, Prime. The bridge went silent. A younger officer looked confused. What's Prime? No one answered immediately. Finally, Sato spoke quietly. The first one humanity ever encountered. Several veterans on the bridge visibly lost color from their faces. Because every human officer knew the old stories. Prime was not merely another creature from beyond the seal. It was the thing that taught humanity fear. Back on Earth, emergency shelters quietly reopened for the first time in centuries. Governments tried avoiding panic, but rumors spread too quickly. People remembered fragments of forbidden history. The worlds humanity sacrificed. The stars they destroyed. The billions they abandoned to stop the darkness. And now the old nightmare was returning. Not because humanity failed, because the Empire had forced open the door. Inside the quarantine zone, the ancient entity finally reached the trapped Imperial fleet. One colossal limb unfolded through darkness. It touched an Imperial battleship gently. The ship disappeared instantly. Not exploded. Not destroyed. Erased. Every record of the vessel vanished simultaneously. Databases corrupted. Crew manifests deleted. Even surviving officers suddenly struggled to remember the ship's name. Valen stared in horror. What did it do? A surviving scientist answered weakly. It consumed the information. Then he began screaming uncontrollably. Because he suddenly realized something even worse. The entity was learning again. Deep beneath Antarctica, Admiral Ward watched the new data arrive. Containment integrity, 84%. Prime entity activity increasing. Extinction protocol countdown available. Commander Reyes spoke quietly. If Prime fully enters normal space. Ward finished the sentence for her. Then this galaxy dies slowly. He looked toward the tactical display showing billions of civilians across nearby systems. Then at the extinction authorization waiting before him. One button. One command. Trillions of lives balanced on it. And humanity might soon have to become monsters again. Far beyond the quarantine zone. Something moved towards Sol at impossible speed. Not the darkness. Something else. Ancient engines burned across dead space. A fleet no one had seen in nearly 300 years. Human ships. Lost during the quiet collapse. Returning home. The first lost ship emerged from deep space without warning. No jump signature. No engine flare. One moment the stars were empty. The next, a massive human battleship drifted silently beyond the quarantine zone. Its hull was scarred black from ancient wars. Entire sections looked melted together. And across its side, barely visible beneath centuries of damage, were faded white letters. UNS Resolute. Every human command center froze. That ship had disappeared 281 years ago. No survivors. No wreckage. Nothing. Yet now it had returned. Inside the UNS Vigil, Admiral Naomi Sato stared at the tactical display. Confirm identity. An officer's hands trembled over the console. Biometric signatures match archived crew records. Another officer looked horrified. That's impossible. No one disagreed. Because the Resolute had vanished during the final days of the quiet collapse. Entire fleets disappeared back then. Most humans assumed they had been destroyed. Now one of them was coming home. And it was not alone. More ships emerged behind it. Dozens. Then hundreds. Ancient human warships slipped silently from distorted space like ghosts rising from a grave. Every vessel carried battle scars older than the modern empire. Some were missing entire sections of hull. Others leaked strange black vapor into space. But all of them still moved. Still functioned. Still pointed toward Sol. A young communications officer whispered. The lost fleet. No human had spoken those words publicly in generations. Because the lost fleet represented humanity's greatest failure. And possibly its greatest sacrifice. 3 centuries earlier, during the final phase of the quiet collapse, humanity launched Operation Black Barrier. Thousands of ships entered the breach beyond reality itself. Their mission was simple. Hold the darkness back long enough for the graveyard fleet to seal the wound. No one expected them to survive. No one ever heard from them again. Until now. Inside the Imperial flagship, Executor Valen watched the arriving human vessels with disbelief. You're telling me those ships are older than the Empire? A surviving Imperial analyst nodded shakily. Yes, sir. Valen stared toward the drifting armada. The ships looked wrong somehow, like they had spent too long somewhere reality did not belong. Then his blood froze. One of the ancient vessels turned toward the trapped Imperial fleet and opened communications. The screen flickered. Static filled the bridge. Finally, a human face appeared, or what used to be a human face. Its skin looked pale gray, its eyes completely black. The figure wore the remains of an ancient military uniform. When it spoke, its voice sounded distorted, layered with faint whispers underneath. Containment has failed. Valen forced himself to answer. Who are you? The figure stared silently for several seconds, as if struggling to remember. Finally, Admiral Jonah Meyer. The name triggered immediate reactions among human officers monitoring the transmission. Meyer was legendary, the commander who led humanity's final charge into the breach. Official records listed him as dead for centuries. Yet somehow, he was still alive, or something close to alive. Back on Earth, emergency networks activated full planetary alerts for the first time in modern history. Shelters filled rapidly. Orbital traffic halted completely. Families gathered around old emergency radios passed down through generations. Humanity had rehearsed for this moment for centuries. Not war with aliens. The return of the darkness. In Antarctica, Admiral Ward opened a secure line to the vigil. Sato appeared immediately. You saw the fleet? Ward nodded. What condition? Sato hesitated. Unknown. That frightened Ward more than any answer could have. Then another transmission interrupted them. This one from the Resolute itself. Admiral Meyer's distorted face appeared again. We cannot hold them much longer. Ward's expression hardened. How many crossed with you? Meyer remained silent briefly, then answered softly. All of them. The room went cold. Because humanity knew exactly what them meant. The entities beyond the seal. Not one monster. Not a species. An entire civilization of impossible things waiting outside reality. Meanwhile, inside the quarantine zone, Prime continued moving towards Sol. Every movement distorted space itself. Stars bent unnaturally around its body. Imperial ships vanished whenever it touched them. Not destroyed. Forgotten. Even memory became unstable near the creature. One Imperial officer suddenly looked around in confusion. Why are we here? Another stared blankly. Who are you? Their identities were being erased while they still lived. The graveyard fleet fired for the first time. Across the galaxy, ancient black structures unleashed beams of pure white light toward Prime. Entire sections of space folded inward violently. The attack would have vaporized planets. Prime barely slowed. Instead, it turned toward the graveyard fleet and smiled. Then one of the massive human war platforms split apart instantly. No explosion, no debris. It simply ceased existing. Human officers across every command network went silent. The graveyard fleet had survived 3 centuries against the darkness. Prime destroyed one in seconds. Admiral Sato inhaled slowly. Deploy all remaining fleets. An officer hesitated. Every fleet. Yes. Humanity's hidden armadas awakened across the galaxy. From beneath oceans. Inside hollow asteroids. Under frozen moons. Ancient shipyards opened for the first time in centuries. Defense AIs activated. Planetary cannons rose toward the stars. Across human space, one message spread everywhere. Final containment operations have commenced. And then humanity finally showed the galaxy its real military power. Thousands of warships emerged around Sol. Then tens of thousands. Then more. Carrier groups larger than moons. Autonomous drone suns. Planet-cracking siege platforms. Weapons hidden since the quiet collapse. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as human fleets filled space in numbers beyond imagination. The Empire had ruled through intimidation for millennia. Humanity had ruled through secrecy. Inside the Imperial Palace, Emperor Kaler collapsed into his throne as live tactical feeds streamed before him. The scale of human military reserves was impossible. Entire hidden fleets emerging from regions the Empire believed empty. Marshal Turin spoke quietly beside him. Now you understand. Kaler looked broken. How long were they preparing for this? Turin answered honestly. Since the last time. Suddenly alarms erupted across every human fleet simultaneously. Prime had stopped moving. The giant entity drifted silently near the quarantine boundary. Watching. Waiting. Then reality tore open behind it. A massive rupture spread through space like shattered glass. And shapes began emerging from inside. Thousands of them. Some larger than planets. Others small enough to disappear inside shadows. None fully obeyed physical laws. The darkness had arrived. Panic spread instantly through Imperial survivors. Several ships attempted retreat. None escaped. The rupture expanded too quickly. Entire sections of space transformed into shifting black void. Human commanders watched silently, because they knew something the Empire did not. This was exactly how the quiet collapse began last time. Admiral Meyer's ancient fleet moved forward slowly toward the breach. The distorted human commander transmitted one final message to Earth. We held them back as long as we could. Ward answered quietly from Antarctica. You did enough. Meyer almost smiled. No, he whispered. We only bought you time. Behind him, shadowy shapes moved through the ruined corridors of the Resolute. Watching. Waiting. The lost fleet had not escaped the darkness unchanged. They had been infected by it, and they knew their time was ending. Then Admiral Meyer gave the order history would remember forever. All lost fleet vessels, initiate final burn. One by one, the ancient ships accelerated directly toward the expanding rupture. Not retreating. Charging. Human crews aboard modern fleets stood silently at attention as the Ghost Armada passed them. No cheers. No speeches. Only respect. These ships had fought the darkness alone for nearly 3 centuries. And now they were going back. Prime turned toward the incoming lost fleet. For the first time, the entity seemed cautious. Admiral Meyer looked directly at the monstrous shape filling half the starscape. Then he spoke humanity's oldest military phrase. Humanity endures. The lost fleet detonated seconds later. Thousands of ancient reactors overloaded simultaneously. A wall of artificial stars erupted across the quarantine zone. The rupture screamed. Space itself shattered violently. Prime disappeared inside the explosion, and the galaxy went white. For 11 full seconds, the galaxy saw nothing but white light. Every sensor failed. Every communication array overloaded. Across thousands of worlds, entire populations stared upward as the stars themselves vanished behind the expanding wave from Sol. Then, darkness. Complete silence spread across galactic networks. No signals escaped the quarantine zone. No human transmissions. No Imperial broadcasts. Nothing. For the first time in recorded history, Sol had gone quiet. On Earth, emergency shelters remained sealed. Millions waited in silence beneath mountains, oceans, and cities. Children slept beside old radiation doors while parents listened to static-filled radios. Nobody knew if humanity still existed. Nobody knew if the seal had held. And deep beneath Antarctica, Admiral Elias Ward sat motionless before dead tactical screens. Commander Reyes stood nearby, pale with exhaustion. Still no contact. The technician shook his head. Nothing. Hours passed. Then suddenly, one monitor flickered weakly. A signal. Very faint. Human. The room instantly came alive. Source. The analyst swallowed nervously. Outer Sol perimeter. Static cleared slowly across the display. A damaged human ship appeared drifting through debris fields. The UNS Vigil. Burned. Broken. But alive. Cheers erupted through the command center. Several officers openly cried from relief. Ward didn't. Not yet. Open channel. The screen stabilized. Admiral Naomi Sato appeared. Blood ran down one side of her face. Half the bridge behind her was dark. But she was standing. Containment status? Ward asked immediately. Sato closed her eyes briefly, then nodded once. The breach is sealed. The room exploded into celebration. After centuries of fear, humanity had survived the darkness again. But Sato raised one trembling hand, and the room fell silent instantly. Prime escaped before final closure. Every heartbeat in the command center seemed to stop. Ward stared at her. Where? Sato looked exhausted beyond words. Unknown. That answer terrified him more than any battlefield report ever had. Because Prime was not merely another creature from beyond reality. It was intelligent, patient, and now it was loose somewhere in the galaxy. Across Imperial space, chaos deepened. The surviving Imperial fleet no longer resembled a military force. Only fragments remained. Burned ships drifted through dead sectors, carrying traumatized crews who struggled to describe what they had seen. Many survivors could no longer remember their own names. Others refused to speak at all. Some simply repeated the same sentence endlessly. The Dark was alive. Executor Valen survived. Barely. His flagship emerged from the quarantine zone with less than 10% operational capacity. Entire decks were empty. Not dead. Gone. Erased. Valen himself looked decades older. As his crippled vessel limped toward Imperial territory, one officer approached carefully. "Sir, orders?" Valen stared silently toward the stars, then whispered the words no Imperial commander had spoken in over 2,000 years. "Retreat." On the Imperial capital world, Emperor Kaler watched the surviving fleet arrive, and finally understood defeat. Not military defeat. Something worse. Humiliation. The Empire had declared war on humanity, believing humans were merely stubborn primitives hiding behind technology. Instead, they discovered guardians. A species standing watch over nightmares the galaxy could barely comprehend. Kaler dismissed the throne chamber entirely. For 3 days, he remained alone. When he finally emerged, he looked broken. Older. Smaller. The first decree he issued shocked the galaxy. The Galactic Empire formally surrendered all claims against human territory. The second decree shocked them even more. All records regarding humanity during the Quiet Collapse were immediately declassified. And for the first time, the galaxy learned the truth. They learned how humanity lost 87 colonies holding the line. How human fleets sacrificed entire systems to stop contamination. How billions volunteered for missions they knew were suicide. How the lost fleet vanished beyond reality itself so others could survive. And most terrifying of all, they learned humanity never considered themselves heroes. Only survivors doing what was necessary. Public reaction across the galaxy changed almost overnight. Fear of humanity remained, but now it mixed with something else. Respect. Weeks later, reconstruction began around Sol. The quarantine zone remained heavily restricted. Massive warning beacons surrounded the region. Human patrol fleets never left. Because even though the breach had closed, humanity knew the war was not truly over. Not while Prime remained free. At a memorial ceremony on Luna, millions gathered beneath Earth's glow. Names of the dead from both the original Quiet Collapse and the recent war stretched endlessly across holographic walls. Among them were the crews of the Lost Fleet, officially declared dead twice. Admiral Ward stood quietly near the front beside Naomi Sato. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, Sato asked softly, "Do you think they bought us enough time?" Ward looked toward the stars. "I think they bought the galaxy another chance." Nearby, children placed small lights beneath the memorial walls, too young to fully understand the horror humanity had faced. And maybe that was the point. Every sacrifice, every terrible choice, every monster humanity became, it was also future generations would never have to know. Months later, diplomatic representatives from hundreds of species arrived on Earth for an emergency galactic summit. Not led by the Empire, by humanity. For the first time in history, the galaxy wanted human leadership willingly. The summit took place in Geneva beneath heavy security. Species who once mocked humans now listened carefully to every word. Secretary Amara Chun addressed the assembly calmly. The Quiet Collapse was never destroyed. A tense silence filled the chamber. It was contained, Chun continued. And containment requires vigilance. A representative from a former imperial world stood shakily. "You're asking us to prepare for another invasion?" Chen's expression hardened slightly. "No." She looked around the enormous chamber. "I'm telling you it already started." Fear spread instantly through the delegates. But Chen raised a hand. And this time, the galaxy won't face it alone. For the first time in centuries, species who once hated each other began discussing cooperation instead of conquest. Defense networks, shared intelligence, joint patrols. Humanity had changed the galaxy forever. Not through domination, through survival. Far away, in the darkness between spiral arms, something drifted silently through dead space. No engines, no heat, no detectable form. Stars dimmed slightly as it passed. Prime, wounded by the lost fleet, but alive and learning. Inside its endless thoughts echoed one emotion humanity had forced upon it long ago. Fear. Because Prime now understood something terrifying. Humanity was no longer merely prey that resisted. Humanity had become hunters. 1 year later, construction began on the largest defensive structure ever created. A ring of colossal stations surrounding the outer edge of the galaxy, built jointly by hundreds of species, commanded by humanity. Officially, it was named the Galactic Containment Network, but soldiers across the stars called it something else. The Wall. And carved into the central station, visible for kilometers across steel and stone, were the final words spoken by Admiral Jonah Meyer before the Lost Fleet's sacrifice. Humanity endures. Somewhere beyond the Wall, ancient horrors still waited. Hungry, patient, listening. But now, whenever darkness moved toward the galaxy, it found humanity standing in the way. And for the first time in cosmic history, the monsters were afraid too.